Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly.
Workers at a Georgia Hyundai plant describe a chaotic scene after an immigration raid at the facility. Federal authorities say Thursday's raid was the result of a months-long investigation by several agencies.
Foreign car makers like Hyundai and BMW to be opposed to imports.
Hyundai, the South Korean giant that turned Alabama and Georgia into symbols of global manufacturing, now stands at the edge of retreat. What was once hailed as a triumph of foreign investment in America is starting to look like a warning sign. The shock isn't just about cars, it's about whether the U.S. itself is losing the ability to hold on to the very companies it fought so hard to attract. On the ground, the reality is brutal. Assembly lines that once ran at full speed are slowing to a crawl. Production is breaking down, schedules are collapsing, and communities built around the promise of industrial stability are being hollowed out. For thousands of workers, the dream of a secure paycheck is suddenly in question. And in towns that depended on Hyundai's presence, local businesses, from diners to suppliers, are already feeling the pain. Consumers aren't spared either. Prices that were once competitive are now spiraling upward, with models climbing thousands of dollars beyond the reach of middle-class families. Buyers are walking away. Dealerships are turning into graveyards of unsold inventory, and the very trust that anchored Hyundai's rise in America is beginning to fracture. The question hanging in the air is chilling. If a powerhouse like Hyundai can't survive under these conditions, what hope is left for the rest of the industry? And if Hyundai really does walk away, who will be next to abandon America's so-called industrial heartland? Before we dive in, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters. And just when the cracks in Hyundai's American story seemed deep enough, a single moment pushed the entire operation into paralysis. The blow didn't come from market forces or consumer demand. It came from Washington's immigration crackdown. In Georgia, the expansion of Hyundai's battery plant was brought to a sudden, jarring halt. Federal agents stormed the site, detaining 475 workers right inside the facility. It wasn't a minor inspection. It was the largest immigration raid ever carried out at a single U.S. workplace. Overnight, the factory floor went silent. Construction timelines collapsed, contractors froze their operations, and entire supply schedules unraveled in real time. The expansion that was supposed to secure Hyundai's future in America instead became a symbol of vulnerability. Many of those workers were on short-term visas, legally present in the country but barred from taking industrial jobs. The fine print of immigration law turned into a wrecking ball for one of the most ambitious clean energy projects in the South. If America's immigration policy can dismantle a billion-dollar investment in a single morning, what message does that send to every other foreign company betting on U.S. soil? If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It's how we keep uncovering what others won't say. As if the Georgia raid weren't destabilizing enough, the next strike came from a different front: tariffs. What began as a labor crisis quickly snowballed into a financial chokehold, leaving Hyundai battered on all sides. By the second quarter of 2025, the numbers told a grim story. Profits plunged more than 20% under the weight of Trump's 25% tariff on imported auto parts. What wasn't seized by immigration enforcement was squeezed out by Washington's trade war. It wasn't just policy, it was a chain reaction designed to test how much pain a company could endure. The effect on consumers was immediate and punishing. Sticker prices on Hyundai models threatened to climb an additional $3 to $6,000, pushing them well beyond the reach of the very buyers who once saw Hyundai as the affordable alternative. Showrooms could only mask the crisis for so long by leaning on existing inventory. But everyone knew the lifeline wouldn't last. Even the Alabama plant, shielded in part by USMCA exemptions, found its advantages erased by the larger storm. Whatever breathing room it offered was nowhere near enough to offset the billions lost across the border supply chain, and with every passing month, the question grew louder. How much longer could Hyundai bleed before the exodus became inevitable? The damage didn't stop at Hyundai's balance sheet, it spilled straight into the streets of the American South. When a corporation of this size stumbles, the shock waves ripple far beyond the factory gates. Thousands of direct and indirect jobs began to evaporate almost overnight. From line workers on the assembly floor to the truck drivers hauling parts, entire livelihoods were suddenly on the line. The mom-and-pop diners that served lunch to plant employees saw empty booths. Local suppliers who once thrived on steady contracts found their invoices unpaid and their warehouses idle. For ordinary families, the pain was just as real at the dealership. Prices shot upward, leaving once affordable cars out of reach. What used to be bustling showrooms turned eerily quiet, with customers either delaying purchases or giving up entirely. The auto market, once a pillar of growth in these regions, began to look more like a graveyard of missed opportunities, and perhaps most dangerous of all was the shift in mood. In Alabama, Georgia, and across the South, communities that once celebrated Hyundai as a beacon of industrial renewal now found themselves gripped by anxiety. If the industrial stronghold of the region could crumble so quickly, what did that say about the future of every other company planted there? What makes this collapse even more jarring is the bitter irony at its core. Policies sold to the public as safeguards for Made in America are now strangling the very industries they were meant to protect. Instead of restoring confidence in U.S. manufacturing, they are driving it into a dead end. Foreign companies, once eager to pour billions into American factories, are suddenly holding back. The risks are simply too high, rules shift overnight, enforcement is unpredictable, and today's incentives can vanish tomorrow. Boardrooms that once saw America as a safe bet are now treating it like a gamble they can't afford to take. At the same time, the country faces a labor paradox it cannot resolve. Factories are desperate for workers, yet immigration crackdowns have cut off the only pipeline that could keep production lines moving. It isn't just a shortage, it's a deliberate suffocation of the labor supply, one that leaves companies with no way to grow even if demand exists. The consequences have already been staggering. In a matter of months, billions of dollars in clean energy and battery projects have been shelved, derailed not by lack of innovation, but by political headwinds. What was supposed to be America's leap into the future has turned into a stalled experiment, and experts are sounding the alarm. The U.S. isn't protecting its industrial base. It's boxing itself into a stalemate. The question is, how long before other nations step in to seize the ground America is abandoning? Backed into a corner by forces it could no longer control, Hyundai began quietly searching for the exits. The idea that once seemed unthinkable, abandoning its American foothold, was now being modeled in boardrooms. Pressure from tariffs, labor crackdowns, and rising costs had pushed the company to the point where staying put looked more like surrender than strategy. On the table were new supply chains stretching toward Vietnam and India. These weren't just backup plans, they were deliberate moves toward cheaper labor, more flexible markets, and governments that promised fewer policy shocks. For Hyundai's leadership, the calculus was simple. Why absorb endless losses in America when other nations offered stability at half the cost? The symbolism cut deeper than the numbers. For decades, the United States sold itself as the gold standard destination for advanced manufacturing. But now, one of the largest automakers in the world was treating it as expendable, a place too unpredictable to sustain modern industry. That shift in perception alone sent tremors through the investment community. And here's the real danger. If Hyundai sets this precedent, what's to stop other global giants from following? Could one company's escape plan trigger a chain reaction that redefines where the world builds its future? Hyundai's struggle is not an isolated tragedy. It's a warning shot for the entire auto industry. The problems battering one company are reverberating across North America, shaking every manufacturer that depends on cross-border trade and global parts. Asian automakers, once pillars of growth in the U.S. market, are reporting plunging profits under the weight of tariffs. What began as a targeted policy against imports has ballooned into a systemic crisis, distorting supply chains that took decades to build. Shipments arrive late, costs spiral out of control, and factories that once operated like clockwork are now running on uncertainty. For American consumers, the fallout feels relentless. Each layer of disruption adds hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to the price of a new car. What was once a competitive market with affordable choices is now collapsing into a space where fewer buyers can participate. Families delay purchases, dealerships sit with unsold inventory, and the broader economy suffers as one of its cornerstone industries loses momentum. And in that vacuum lies another danger. If U.S. policy continues to erode confidence, the space left behind won't remain empty for long. Competitors from Europe and China are already circling, ready to seize the demand America can no longer serve. The question is no longer whether the U.S. auto sector is at risk, it's whether it can survive the global challenge now gathering at its doorstep. From Hyundai's faltering expansion came a brutal lesson for America itself. What was supposed to be a story of industrial renewal has instead exposed a deep vulnerability. International investors no longer view the U.S. as the safe haven it once claimed to be. The land of opportunity is starting to look like a land of uncertainty. Capital is already scanning for alternatives, flowing toward emerging hubs that promise cheaper costs, steadier policies, and more reliable labor. Every dollar that leaves U.S. soil doesn't just weaken one company, it strengthens America's rivals. Instead of reinforcing its industrial backbone, Washington may be laying the foundation for competitors to rise in its place. And the haunting question remains, if Hyundai is only the first to move, who comes next? How many more industries will quietly slip away before America realizes what it's losing? That's the warning Hyundai has left on the table, a glimpse of a future where America watches its factories drift abroad while rivals claim the spoils. But do you think this is just the beginning of a larger exodus? Or can U.S. policy still turn the tide before it's too late? Thanks for watching, and if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click fuels the truth.